Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Mira Pantic. Welcome to the Global Newsroom. Today, we're going to talk about foreign correspondence. Let me share my screen with you and start with the slideshow for today. So, who are foreign correspondents? What is their job? What is it that they do? Foreign correspondents are journalists who report about events and issues in another country or region. So they are journalists, like journalists in the United States. The only difference is that they're not covering events in the United States, but they're reporting about events and issues in another country. So they are physically present in the country from which they are reporting. These journalists cover a wide range of issues, and those issues include politics, war, protests, but they also cover entertainment and trends in the society from which they are reporting. Now, looking into this journalism values, what do you think? What kind of values do they share? Like, do they share the same values that journalists, local journalists in the United States share? Or are they journalism values different? What do you think? They are pretty much the same, but there are slight differences between journalists reporting in the United States and journalists reporting from abroad. Let me reflect upon some of them. The truth, delivering the truth, is the most important value of journalism, the first principle of journalism. Is it important to both reporters who do reporting in the United States and who report from abroad? Of course it is. Objectivity is also one of the critical values that both journalists working in the US and abroad share. Accuracy of information, so they are also required to deliver information that is accurate. They're also required to use their to use all the resources they have to verify the information in question. They're expected to be independent in their reporting. So what does it mean? Independent from any political parties, independent from their government and the government in the country that they're reporting from, independent from any external factors when they report news from abroad. And also they need to put the news in context. Does this apply to both journalists who work in the US and journalists who work abroad? Yes, definitely. So both need to put the news in context. But you will see certain differences when it comes to putting the news in context. What are they? So when it comes to reporting from abroad, we need to provide a much wider context, because just imagine receiving some news from South Africa, for example, and it is not expected of audiences to understand the history, the culture, of South Africa, so the economy of the country, and so on. So that reporter who is reporting from South Africa is supposed to provide some context in terms of background information, maybe some historical information that is relevant to the story, economic information if they're reporting about economy-related issues. So this is very important. It is important to add context to our story, even when we're reporting about local news, of course. But when it comes to reporting from abroad, we really need to provide a much broader context, because we can't expect of our local audience to know all these facts about another country. So we need to supply them with these facts in order for them to understand what is going on. When it comes to audiences, so both journalists report for their local audience. So for the person reporting from abroad, even though they are, let's say, in South Africa, or reporting from Belgium, or reporting from France, or maybe reporting from the Middle East, they are reporting to the American audience, just like local reporters in the US. So we basically have the same audience, but the only difference is that they're reporting to this audience from abroad. So you see that basically when it comes to journalism values and when it comes to journalism goal and journalistic mission, it is pretty much the same. There are no differences between those journalists working from abroad and those journalists working in the country. They also use a similar structure when they're writing a news story. But when it comes to the context of events, they're usually required to go more in depth and provide certain background information in order for our audience here to understand the story better. Now, who are these people? Who are foreign correspondents? What is it required of a person who strives to become a foreign correspondent? These people are very well educated, so they need to understand the region and the country to which they're going and from which they're going to report. They usually speak multiple languages or at least one foreign language. And if they speak the language of the country from which they're reporting, that can really better their reporting. That can really help them report stories better. And why? Because imagine when you're communicating with people in another country, if you're communicating with officials, they're likely to speak English, and you can communicate with them in English. But if you, let's say, want to interview locals, you either need to find somebody who will do the translation for you, or it's much better if you speak the language so you can communicate with them directly. And also, another benefit is that locals are, they like when they hear a foreigner, somebody coming from abroad, speaking their language, and they're more likely to share their stories with them. So you don't feel really, if you start speaking their language, you don't feel like, they don't feel that you're a foreigner. So they feel closer to you. And that is one of the benefits. So many of these people speak multiple languages, and it is a great benefit to speak the language of the country from which they're reporting. They're elite among journalists. So they're really focused on politics and social issues and so on, and they communicate with top officials abroad. So what is it that they're primarily interested in? They're interested in covering all the topics that can also affect us in the United States, or interested in covering those topics that are just intriguing, relevant for the world. Now, we talked about them being elite among journalists, well educated, well paid. They live in a different country. They're likely to speak multiple languages. They communicate with top officials abroad. They go to these mainstream events. But also, being a foreign correspondent for many of them means working in dangerous conditions. Just remember, we talked about freedom of expression and freedom of the press. And when we look at the map, the World Freedom Index, we see how many countries abroad are struggling with freedom of expression. How many journalists across the globe are struggling to report on issues that are sensitive, issues that are related to organized crime, corruption, politics, elections, and so on. So yes, these conditions could be dangerous for foreign correspondent if, like, the country and their top official perceive that journalist as a potential danger. But also, working in dangerous conditions mean covering a war, covering a conflict, or covering violent protests. So some jobs, when it comes to foreign correspondent, some jobs could be really attractive. There are great countries to work in. So just imagine, let's say that you work as a foreign correspondent in Brussels. So it's definitely a much better. You're in a much better position than somebody who is, let's say, a foreign correspondent in Syria, where the civil war started in 2011, or covering the war in Ukraine, or the Gaza Strip. So you can just imagine all these differences. If you're in Brussels, you're likely to report about NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the European Union because their headquarters are in Brussels. But if you're in Gaza, you're reporting about war, and you're in a much different position. So keep that in mind. Not all foreign correspondents are in a solid, stable position. Talk about it more during this lecture. How it all developed. Why do we have foreign correspondents? Why is it important that we have journalists across the globe who cover various regions? So first stories in Europe and the US from other countries appeared in newspapers in the 17th century. In the US, these stories from Europe were reprinted with a delay of 2 to 3 months. European countries were very interested to collect news from abroad because they wanted to learn about foreign lands. So this was basically in line with their imperialistic endeavors. Collecting information for European countries from other countries was an element of economic and industrial exploitation of the world. Now, with the Industrial Revolution, exchanging this information became much faster. So we didn't wait in the US for 2 to 3 months to receive news from other countries. Industrial Revolution led to the professionalization of foreign news reporting in the 19th century. Everything became easier, traveling, and that includes newspapers that includes like faster exchange of news, and of course newspapers, US and Europe started investing more money in foreign news. Another thing that occurred that contributed to this professionalization of foreign news is the establishment of news agencies. Those news agencies include Associated Press, Reuters, and AFP. So they started collecting news from abroad and distributing it further. Now, the golden age for foreign correspondence was not the 19th, but the 20th century. So a lot of it sped up in the 19th century because of the Industrial Revolution, but the beginning of the 20th century was the golden age. Editors and owners of the media started sending reporters abroad to report the news from other countries. So they wanted not just the agency copy, so they were able to receive news from news agencies such as Reuters or Associated Press because they had reporters all over the world, but they wanted to go beyond this. They wanted to have their own correspondents situated in the most prominent centers in the world. Like they wanted to have foreign correspondents in Paris, in Moscow, in Tokyo, and so on. The reason for that is because they wanted to obtain more in-depth reports from abroad. And then during the two world wars, during the First World War, the Second World War, and the Cold War, foreign news kept gaining prominence because at this time especially, what was happening abroad was affecting us as well. We participated in these global events and we needed to get the news from foreign lands. And as I mentioned, one of we saw from like this even golden age of foreign correspondence, we saw that some of the key events that foreign correspondents focused on were 3 wars: the First World War, Second World War, and the Cold War. That means that a lot of many foreign correspondents engaged in very dangerous form of reporting. This form of reporting is war reporting. What does it mean for a person who is covering a war? So reporters are exposed to extreme dangers when they collect information on the ground from a battlefield. So they're risking their lives when they're reporting from abroad. I believe that just this year, about 10 journalists lost their life in Ukraine. Today, we receive news from the battlefields, not only from foreign correspondents, but we can see a lot of things on social media. In the 20th century, we were receiving this news copies from news agencies, but also from foreign correspondents of other prominent news organizations who work abroad. At the end of the 20th century, there was one interesting development, and that is when TV stations started delivering live coverage of war and crisis. But what does this mean, and what did this mean for the people who are supposed to deliver such stories for foreign correspondents? So basically, imagine delivering live coverage of wars that just put them under more pressure and in even a greater danger as they were trying to deliver stories quickly and competing with other news organizations to deliver these stories promptly, comprehensively, and so on. In addition to this, exposure to these life-threatening events, such as reporting from a war zone, also brings risk for PTSD to journalists who work under these circumstances. Another thing that happened at the end of the 20th century when war reporters started reporting live from a battlefield is that the reporting on war has changed a lot because the wars themselves have changed. So I mentioned an example of Syria. Wars are no longer short, or do no longer present short, intensive clashes. They're now easier to get into than to get out of. I mentioned this example of the civil war in Syria that started in March 2011, but also we didn't expect that the war in Ukraine would last that long, and it started at the beginning of 2022. Why is foreign correspondence important to us, and how do we feel about receiving news from abroad? We touched upon this before, but there was a period where media owners were more interested in profit and attracting bigger audience, which sort of affected the interest in foreign news. And this especially applies to the period between 1990 and 2000. Why? Not just that they started focusing more on profit and that prompted audiences to lose interest in foreign news, but it's also because after the Cold War ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and after the Soviet Union fell apart, people just started losing their interest in foreign news, and they turned to the local news instead and local entertainment. That interest in foreign news, you remember when it resumed after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, because people started being more interested in what was happening abroad, and they were particularly interested in issues related to terrorism. What is happening with foreign news today? Less news is reported from abroad due to cost reduction and new technologies on one hand. By 1995, foreign news represented only 13.5% of total television network coverage in the US. So news gathering, in a way, became this collaborative enterprise with reliance on non-professional media in collecting information. We don't have that many foreign correspondents stationed abroad because it is expensive to have them. So due to the rising costs that have made maintenance of staffer abroad expensive, there are just too few correspondents stationed overseas, and they're stationed in this critical in the most relevant cities, the most relevant regions in the world. Or there is a correspondent who would be stationed in one country and basically cover the entire region, not just that country. So, and I'm sorry about this. Let me just give you an example about the financial costs. So I touched upon that briefly, but let's take a look at how much does it cost to maintain a newspaper bureau overseas with at least one reporter. So maintaining newspaper bureau for a year ranges from $150,000 to $250,000, and this cost keeps going up. So I can imagine that especially after COVID, it would be even more expensive to have a journalist stationed abroad. A TV bureau can cost more than $1 million a year. So what do media do? Because if we think about how much money it costs to have a reporter stationed abroad or a TV bureau, so what do news media do? How do they address this financial cost? So one of the things that they do is they rely on buyer service or news agencies such as AP, Reuters, and AFP. So these news agencies, they have reporters all over the world, and these reporters deliver written information, they deliver videos, they deliver photographs. So they basically supply mainstream news media with information from other countries where those news media do not have their own staff. So this is a good alternative. And if you look at, just click on any news website, go to their world or globe section, and you will see how much information comes from these news agencies. Another thing that they do is they buy stories from stringers because this is much cheaper. Stringers are local foreign journalists. So they're less expensive and they have knowledge of their countries. So let's say if you need a story from city in Germany and you don't have a reporter over there, you will try to contact local stringers who are very knowledgeable, very familiar with the situation, local journalists, and then they're also fluent in English, so they can deliver this report to you in English. Another thing that they do is they gather information and news from internet sources. There are many news websites across the globe that deliver the news not only in their language, their native language, but they also deliver the news in English. So if you are knowledgeable enough of these sources that exist abroad, then you may just search for information and go to their websites and then try to compile information from multiple sources, which is what we call curation of information. So you can compile information, use a little bit of information from news agencies, then use some information from other internet sources, and then compile that into a story and deliver it to your audience without actually being there. And a lot of people also resort to social media to collect information. Of course, when collecting information from social media, we need to be really cautious. We need to verify that information. It's not just enough to look at one source and simply copy and paste that information into your story, but you need to look for multiple sources and see if they're reporting the same thing from some country or region. So just keep this in mind. A lot of people, and this especially applies social media. We touched upon that when we talked about tsunami in South Asia. So basically, when there is a natural disaster happening, such as a tsunami or earthquake, we can really use ordinary people. We can really get in touch with ordinary people on social media and ask them to share some information with us, to share images with us, and to see if they're of course willing to share that with us, because that way we can report to wider population what is happening abroad. But especially with natural disasters, this is really important, as maybe we don't have a reporter in that country, but we still need to report what's happening there. So we're going to use any information that we find to be authentic and relevant, that is published on social media, that we have a permission to further publish. We're going to use that information for our reports. And for the end of this lecture, I thought it would be important for you to watch a video. I found like a very interesting video about foreign correspondents from other countries in the US. So today we talked about war reporting, and we talked about foreign correspondents, American foreign correspondents who work abroad. But I also want you to see how foreign correspondents who come to work in the US see the country. So this is the New Yorker documentary. You will also find the link posted in classes. So I want you to watch this documentary. And after watching this documentary, you will respond to the following questions. What is the role of foreign correspondents? What makes reporting from the US significant for the rest of the world? What is the experience of foreign correspondents with American citizens? And then at the end, list 3 unusual or new facts that you learned about in this video. What is it that you learned about foreign correspondence after watching this video? So after that, you will just write your answers in the form of an essay and post it in classes under correspondence in the US. Okay, so these are my references. Again, foreign correspondents are journalists who report from abroad. They represent elites among journalists. They're very well educated, frequently speak multiple languages, and when they deliver news stories, it is important for them to provide a wider context so the audience in the country to which they're reporting, in their original country, they can understand what is really going on abroad. Thank you very much for your time. And this is all that I have for you for today. Enjoy your week, and we will talk more about foreign correspondence in class. Bye-bye.